Organisational behaviour. In this film, we will talk about organisational structures and cultures. In part 1, we will define organisational behaviour. In part 2, we will talk about organisational structures. In part 3, organisational cultures. And in part 4, the relationship between organisational cultures and structures. So, let's define organisational behaviour.
Every workplace is different. Everyone has stories about good and bad coworkers, as well as workplace structure that either made those jobs amazing,
yay,
or unbearable.
Aww.
Studying how individuals and groups behave in various organizations will help develop your skills to take on leadership roles. How employees communicate, how an organization is structured, and how problems are addressed are just some of the factors of organizational behavior. A good manager who is familiar with these behaviors can influence individuals and groups to create effective organizations.
In this part, we will talk about organisational structures. Organisations are classed by size, sector and ownership. They may be private or public companies, either profit or non-profit orientated, production or service orientated, a partnership, whether it's limited or not, or sole trader associations, formal or informal, legal or illegal. Organisational structure is a framework used by a company to divide its processes and activities needed to complete business operations. Most companies use a well-defined structure that lists management positions and who is responsible for tasks and activities. Let's look at the types of structures. Company structures can be functional, geographic, product, or customer-based. Functional structure is based on activity or function. Geographic structure is based on location of businesses or department. Product structure consists of self-contained divisions. A division is a collection of functions which produce a product. And the last structure is customer base, which is based on an individual, a business, or government consumers. Companies may decide to use a matrix organisational structure, which combines one or more structure bases. For example, combining product and customer structures allows a company to manufacture and market specific goods or services for different customer types. Organisation structures will typically fall under a centralised or decentralised form. Centralised relies on one individual to make decisions, while decentralised organisations will rely on several individuals for decisions. Organisations are set up in specific ways to accomplish different goals, and the structure of an organisation can help or hinder its progress towards accomplishing these goals. There are 3 main types of organisational structure: functional, divisional, and matrix structure. Functional structure is set up so that each portion of the organisation is grouped according to its purpose. In this type of organisation, for example, there may be a marketing department, a sales department, and a production department. The functional structure works very well for small businesses in which each department can rely on the talent and knowledge of its workers and support itself. However, one of the drawbacks to a functional structure is that the coordination and communication between departments can be restricted by the organisational boundaries of having the various departments working separately. Divisional structure typically is used in larger companies that operate in a wide geographic area or that have separate smaller organisations within the umbrella group to cover different types of products or market areas. For example, the now defunct Technosay Products Company was organised divisionally, with a small engine division, a compressor division, a parts division, and division for each geographic area to handle specific needs. The benefit of this structure is that needs can be met more rapidly and more specifically. However, communication is inhibited because employees in different divisions are not working together. Divisional structure is costly because of its size and scope. The third main type of organisational structure, called the matrix structure, is a hybrid of divisional and functional structure. Typically used in large multinational companies, the matrix structure allows for the benefits of functional and divisional structure to exist in one organisation. This can create power struggles because most areas of the company will have dual management. For example, a functional manager and a product or divisional manager working at the same level and covering some of the same managerial territory.
Organisational structure. Businesses can be very complex organisations with many hundreds or thousands of people working in them in many different roles. In order to manage their resources effectively, businesses must have clear organisational structures in place. Organisational structures include the different relationships between people in an organisation. For example, in some cases, an employer might want to have a formal relationship between people in the organisation, or in others it might be more relaxed. This happens in everyday life too. Think about any organisation that you're a part of. Do you call the other people by their first names? Do you call them by their title? What about the other members themselves? Do they call each other Mrs. D, Dr. X, or Mr. M? Or do they refer to each other by their first names? How do they refer to the person leading the organisation? Different levels in a business are referred to as hierarchies. A hierarchy occurs where people are given some sort of title or rank that signifies their importance in the organisation. All businesses have employees working at different levels of responsibility. At the bottom, a business depends on its operatives to produce the products or services. Team leaders often perform the day-to-day management role, with operational managers setting direction and strategy for the business as a whole. The number of employees in each level will depend on the business's organisational structure. It is important to determine who takes responsibility for decision-making, who reports to who, and who to blame when things mess up, or who gets the pat on the back if things go well. There are three typical organisational structures. They are known as hierarchical, flat, and matrix. A hierarchical structure is typical in large companies, where each level of employee reports upwards and each level has a narrow span of control. The downside of this type of structure is that it can often lead to significantly slower communication and decision-making. A flat organisational structure has much less levels of hierarchy and wider spans of control. This means employees at each level can communicate with managers more easily and quickly. However, this usually means that workers take more responsibility for decision-making. The benefits of this are that it may encourage a more dedicated and motivated workforce. Typically, this type of structure is used in small businesses and startups. A benefit of this structure is that it allows the business to change rapidly to respond to the market, customer, or competitors. However, this only applies if the staff are well trained and are actually capable of making the changes. Lastly, a matrix structure gathers employees who hold the relevant expertise in order to help the business to meet its goals. The people selected come from different levels and departments within the business. The structure can be used in both hierarchical and flat organisations and are typically used for specific projects. Individual team members may come from different parts of the business, regardless of their usual location in the hierarchy. Obviously, once a project is over, the matrix will be disbanded.
In part 3, we will talk about organisational culture. Culture in the organisational context may be broadly defined as the sum of groups or nations' way of thinking, believing, feeling and acting. Culture is the way of life of a group of people. More formally, culture is defined as the complex whole which includes knowledge, beliefs, art, morals, customs and any other capabilities and habits acquired by the members of society. Organisational culture includes an organisation's expectations, experiences, philosophy and values that hold it together, and is expressed in its self-image, inner workings, interactions with the outside world, and future expectations. It is based on shared attitudes, beliefs, customs, and written and unwritten rules that have been developed over time and are considered valid. Organisational culture can also be called corporate culture. It's shown in the way the organisation conducts its business, treats its employees, customers and the wider community. It is shown in the extent to which freedom is allowed in decision making, developing new ideas and personal expression. It is shown in how power and information flow through its hierarchy, and how committed employees are towards collective objectives. Let's take a look at the culture inside the Google company.
Got a knot in your back? Schedule a massage. Looking for inspiration? Attend a talk with a world leader.
Starts with an open internet.
Or pop icon.
The most important thing I think with creativity is that you honor your creativity.
Free gourmet meals and shuttle rides aren't unheard of in Silicon Valley. But why does Google go above and beyond? Now that I've been spending a little bit of time here at the Googleplex, soaking up the corporate culture, chatting with Googlers, I'm starting to pick up on a trend. See if you can spot it.
We are constantly looking to figure out, any type of program that will make Googlers happier, healthier, and more productive.
They can collaborate and they can do the work in the most productive manner.
We are, at the forefront of making people decisions and figuring out how to have a really productive workforce.
Be more productive.
More productive.
And super productive.
In the last 14 years, Google has gone from 2 employees to over 32,000, making it tough to preserve its nimble and industrious startup days. To recapture that vibe, Google hires people analysts like Jessica Wisdom.
We want to make them healthy and we want to make them happy. And the ultimate goal is, of course, to keep them here, to keep them, engaged in their work. And research does show that when people are happy, they're more engaged in their work and more productive.
But Google doesn't subscribe to typical HR philosophies. This is the company whose data mining strategies created a multi-billion-dollar business. Google knew providing free, flavorful meals on campus would keep workers from straying too far from their desks. But it didn't just hire a chef and tell them to get cooking. It ran experiments, collected results, and analyzed them to carefully craft a healthy and appetizing menu. It goes beyond cafes. When Google opens new office space, it uses practically every methodology in the book.
We have a passion for collecting the right data, analyzing it, and implementing it into every design. So from surveys of each individual person, to interviews, to brainstorms, we've even done psychological profiles over the years.
Hang on. Psychological profiles? Yep. To design its Zurich offices, employees took personality tests. Fascinating, right? But does this sound slightly Orwellian to anyone else?
The other message is, well, why should you ever leave? I mean, we always want you to be here. And to me, the joke I tell is there's a sociological literature on things that are called total institutions. Prisons would be an example of a total institution. I don't know, maybe the Army, mental institutions, something you check in but you never leave.
Sutton labels some Google policies as liberal paternalism, but he says the tech giant truly tries to be a force for good. Still, Googlers must have some gripes, right?
A lot of my passion is kind of in like the social enterprise and social change space. And so part of my main reason of leaving Google was there wasn't quite the opportunity for me there at the time to sort of have those passions filled.
A common refrain among ex-Googlers. Eventually, they may want to invest all those long hours on their own project.
In this last part, we will talk about the relationship between organisational structure and culture. Organisational structure and organisational culture have a dependent relationship with one another. In the business world, management structure determines the behaviours, attitudes, dispositions and ethics that create the work culture. If a company's organisational structure is strictly hierarchical, with decision-making power centralised at the top, the company's culture will likely reflect a lack of freedom and autonomy at the lower levels. If a company's management structure is decentralized with shared power and authority at all levels, the culture is likely to be more independent, personalized, and accountable. The way a company allocates power and authority determines how employees behave. These choices manifest in a company's organizational structure and organizational culture. Organizational structure is the way a company arranges its management and lines of authority. It determines roles, responsibilities, and the flow of information within the company. Work culture results from these decisions. To reach their goals effectively, organizations always need to have a formal structure. This is important to distribute tasks in different groups to ensure that no two people are working on the same project or task so that we can get the most output for our input. Because organizations cannot be run without people, this tends to create different informal structures or environments in the organization, which leads to different attitudes, perceptions, behaviors, and traits with lots of different types of aptitudes. So when employees are supposed to work together on a task, in the constraints of a formal structure to reach a certain objective, there are certain ways to speak and interact, which in effect forms an organizational culture, where it may be created knowingly or unknowingly by the employees.
Welcome. This is HR That Works President Don Finn, and today I'm going to answer the question, how does organizational structure affect company culture? And my first response to that question is size matters. Obviously, if you're at a Fortune 5,000 company, you're going to have a different structure, if you will, than if you're at a 3-person entrepreneurial company. But the thing to understand, the reason that we have these structures in the first place is to generate a chain of command. And we used to think very top-down. Nowadays, sometimes a lot of companies are thinking bottom-up. Other companies are thinking along the lines of neural networks, almost how your IT system works, how your communication really flows in an organization. So chain of command is a very important thing, as well as responsibilities. But you also, you have a very specialized workforce in one area. They might not fit into that hierarchy very well, and if you try to jam into it, it'll actually destroy their culture. So, if let's say one part of the organization is very compliant and the other one's innovative, they're going to need 2 different types of structures, because if you can't mismatch their cultures with the same structure in a sense. Now, one thing I realized is that you want to be really close to the works that's being done. So if you have an organizational structure where the very top is very disconnected from the work being done, that will affect culture, okay? So one of the things that I remember an HR executive being told by a CEO says, think close to where the money is. All right, so when you're creating your structure, really think close to what we're trying to accomplish with it. And then you can build your organizational structure around that culture. So I would think culture first, organizational structure second. I hope that helps you. This is Don Finn, President of HR That Works.